welcome everybody to the Hobart City Council Planning Meeting. Before we start, I'll just note that we've got Dr. Little and some students from the Master of Planning course at the University of Tasmania here observing us to see how these planning deliberations happen in practice. So I'll just everybody welcome them and make sure we're all on our best behaviour. Thank you. Confirmation of minutes.
So moved.
Councillor Harvey, thank you. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
And say no. Carried. Communications of opportunity and conflicts of interest.
Yes, item 6.2.1, 41 Newdigate Street.
Yeah, any more? No. Transport agenda item? No. And planning authority items, consideration of items with deputations. We only have the one, which is item 6.2.1. Does somebody
So moved.
Say aye.
Aye.
And say no. Carried unanimously. So we will move to 6.2.1.
Declare an interest, Chair.
And we do have two deputations. One is from Amy Booth. Yes, Amy, if you'd like to sit on that table just there in the middle and drag one of those microphones. You'll have 5 minutes to speak. I'll give you a warning when you've got 30 seconds left.
Sure.
And we'll have some questions for you.
Pardon?
And then we'll likely have some questions for you.
Okay. Yep.
So do you want to start?
Every house that is being turned into short-term accommodation is another home that is being taken off of the rental market. So it's another place that an owner-occupier or a renter isn't able to call home. Effectively, this particular building, this house that we're talking about at 41 Newdigate Street, it used to be the Bridge Association Club, so it was a community place. Then it turned into a home, and now it could be the equivalent to a hotel. So the character afforded to a residential area from long-term residents, it's different to that from an area where there's large amounts of short-term visitors. The sense of community, that sense of neighbourhood, it's where you know one another. It builds safety and trust. The more houses and homes that are being turned into short-term accommodation we're going further away from that. We've got Battery Point, that's a place where short-term accommodation isn't happening. Their sense of community is so much stronger, arguably, than places where slowly full homes that could be rented out, that could be owned, are now for visitors, for tourists, for people who have that privilege and ability to come here and experience the amazing place that we have of Hobart. But what is Hobart when those who are living in tents, sleeping in their cars, who can afford a certain amount of rent but are now being priced out? So I am in opposition to this particular place being turned into a short-term accommodation, given the housing crisis, given the rental crisis that we're in. The number of people who are dealing with housing insecurity right now is increasing dramatically. There are people who are camping in their tents in the Rivulet. There are people every night that are sleeping in their cars. We're coming into a moment of colder weather. It becomes much more dangerous for these people, and yet rents are increasing, more places. I think it's already, over 37 homes, many of them that were once rented out, already this year have turned into short-term accommodation. So that's 37 homes that could have been rented out. That's 37 homes, which is, potentially upwards of 100 people that could have called that place home for long-term housing security, is now no longer available. And I acknowledge that the cost of living isn't just affecting more than just renters, but to turn a 3-bedroom house that could be the safety net for multiple individuals to live in with a level of housing security into a place that would just be somewhere for some people for a few days of the week or a few days of the fortnight, for them to see what they think of Hobart offers, it's treating those people who are suffering housing insecurity with disrespect. And I've got friends who in North Hobart, around the corner from this place, recently just found a place to rent for $185 a week per person in their share house, and there's mould in there. I mean, we are in the middle of a housing crisis, and whilst I acknowledge the limitations that committees and councils have on looking at what you're allowed to accept and what you sort of oppose when applications like this come in. This is a very different time that we're in, and the fact that right now demand is far above supply, we can't be letting all of these homes that could be rented out being turned into short-term accommodation. Perhaps in the future, perhaps when we have more supply than demand, but at the moment there are people that have jobs, have money, but because of the cost of living, which the cost of rent and housing aspects is a big part of that, they're not able to afford it. And then people who could be able to afford somewhere, there's just not supply. And here is another house that could be somewhere that's rented, as it has been in the past, is now, you know, potentially not going to be. And it's a pretty sad state of affairs when there's this opportunity that we have as a community to focus on the basic aspects. You know, we get told that food, water and shelter are these top things, and here is shelter that is not being allowed for people that really, really need it. I'm someone that I don't live in the city of Hobart because I can't afford to. I live in another council because it's cheaper there. And then whilst I'm here, I actually sleep out of my vehicle for half the week. It's like, that's just one story. But if you've walked down the rivulet and you've seen people in tents, that's another really dire story as well. So, yeah, I'm not sure how many people here know what it's like to be constantly thinking about, is that 5 minutes? 30 seconds, yep. To be constantly thinking about housing stress is not great. You can't really think about anything else when you're trying to think about how much longer you've got to live in a certain place. And this particular location could be somewhere that a few more people could live in long term if it's not turned into short-term accommodation.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation and your concerns that you've raised. I just want to put to you a question with regards to the Planning Directive 6. Have you read that directive, and how does that criteria apply to the points you have made with regards to housing prices, shortage, etc.?
Is this referring to the performance criteria that it has to meet?
Yeah.
Well, I think I wrote down. So,
the State Government Planning Directive.
Pardon?
That's the State Government Planning Directive.
Oh, I haven't read that. No.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Any other questions? Thanks so much. If you'd like to take your seat, we'll call up Helen Burnett. Thank you. I don't think I need to read out the usual spiel, so I'll just let you start.
Thank you, Chair. This is the first time I've sat in this position, and I won't take up my five minutes, but thank you for your time. So I sit opposite you today instead of with you because my neighbourhood is being destroyed, carved out into a series of mini hotels. There's been a steady creep of short stay up Newdigate Street and in other nearby streets of North and West Hobart, which are displacing more and more people. Take the young people living at 41 Newdigate Street, currently renting, or up until recently, who are now possibly facing precarious, insecure housing. Possibly they cannot find a house, are paying a greater portion of their income in rent, in rental stress perhaps, or have ended up on the social housing waiting list. Good luck to them. A day where our local paper has not one, not two, but 3 articles on the problems that youth in Tasmania are facing in relation to homelessness. So today, ironically, or the timing couldn't be starker, but today is the Tasmanian. Where is it? What's the name of it? Is Youth Homelessness Matters Day. So, and here we are talking about young people being basically displaced yet again. So, I live 2 streets away and walk along this street every day. I know the area really well. My neighbourhood has an eclectic mix of people living here. students, older people, working couples, families. I remember talking to one woman, an older woman, who had a small flat in Newdigate Street a while ago. It's a sad story. She lived there so that she could be living closer to her son, who had mental health issues, who needed her help, who was in public housing in North Hobart. She was concerned about her rented flat, which had recently been sold and would become unaffordable. What would she do and how would she care for her son if her rent was increased or when she was turfed out so that the flat could be made into short stay accommodation? Just getting back to 41 Newdigate Street, this conversion to short stay accommodation is being considered by this committee tonight because there are 16 representations all expressing concerns about this short stay creep and the impacts on the neighbourhood. It is also before you because there are discretions, and this does provide you with the opportunity to reject this application. I urge you to do so on whatever grounds you can find to not support this application. I also appeal to the applicant at this 11th hour to withdraw this application and maintain this property as rental accommodation. What are we as Tasmanians if we cannot think of the impacts this short stay cancer has on young people, old people and the fabric of our city? You can probably hear my frustration. I know it's shared with many of you, but I urge you to reject this application tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the deputation? Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to address you as councillor or deputy. I'm just going to address you as Helen. Thank you for your presentation. No doubt you are aware of the state's directive number 6. Would you be able to point to me as to which element of that I could use to reject this, which you're urging us to do?
Well, I think there lies the frustration, Councillor Dutta. This is you're caught between a rock and a hard place. But I do point you to the report, and the report does talk about discretions, whilst it does not support that the discretion holds. But there is parking and access in relation to the performance criteria. This is a very frustrating situation that the council has found itself in time and time again, and obviously there is that move to try and change the position and the powers that the minister has. But yes, I find it very difficult to find what PD6 really does for the people in this situation who will be turfed out of their place.
Just a follow-up question. So I understand from your response that we have only one discretion, and that is the parking one under E661P1. Now, I'm accepting the fact that you have read the report. In the report, it says that while as that house being rented out, they required 2 spaces for car parking. But this one here, it will reduce it to only 1 car park. Don't you think there is this is a better option
for
parking?
Well, I don't. Well, if there's one less car park for people to sleep in, then maybe it is. I really think that this is not a better option in relation to the neighbourhood. This is a really poor outcome for the neighbourhood.
Any other questions? Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Helen, for your deputation. Have you got some numbers that reflects the changing area? How many short stay accommodation?
I don't have
around that area. And
the numbers are quite difficult to see, but if you go onto one of the platforms like Try Booking or Airbnb, then you will find many short stay alternatives. And of course, we're quite close to a commercial area on North Hobart, on the North Hobart Strip, and the council has argued that short stay accommodation in commercial zones is fine. It's the matter of this turning over of homes into short stay accommodation, which is just slowly eroding our community. But and we know that many residents don't want to speak up because they don't think anything really will be done as a result of them speaking up.
I think the number was about 13 a month, 13 homes lost per month to short stay, if I recall. I might check that with the director a bit later.
Are there any other questions? No.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alrighty, that's it for deputations. We were supposed to have the applicant giving a deputation, but they've had a personal matter, so I believe they emailed through to every elected member their representation. Did anybody want to open the item, or were there any questions of officers? Councillor Dada.
Two questions to the director through you.
Yep.
On page 151, 6.7.5, I refer to the statements. The empirical parking assessment indicates that the provision of one on-site car parking spaces will sufficiently meet, and it goes on. My question is, the empirical parking assessment, when was this done, and what was the methodology used?
The empirical car parking requirements are stipulated within the Hobart Interim Planning Scheme. They're documented as, in terms of short stay visitor accommodation, in fact, they're documented within the Planning Directive 6, in fact.
And the other question that I have, it's page 152, I think it is. 152, and it states that the observations indicate that there is a relative. How was this done again? How was the indication?
Look, I assume that it was officers.
The observations, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I assume it was officers attending the site on a number of occasions, observing the pattern of car parking in the area.
Just a follow-up question to the chair. So the officers attending, do we have a record as to which days and which times they attended?
I don't have that available to me.
So is it possible to get that, or?
It may well be. I can certainly ask the question.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Look, these short stay accommodation applications are incredibly frustrating because we've got our hands tied basically by the state government PD 6, which gives us no grounds really to refuse these applications. But could you just remind us though how many of these sort of applications we receive a month? Is it still around the 13 homes lost per month to short stay?
Yeah, look, between the 1st of January and the 19th of April, we've had 41 applications that have been considered and approved.
Any rejected?
None that I'm aware of, no.
And we really don't have any tools available, any planning scheme, things that we can use to reject short stays. Our hands are tied.
They are limited in nature. They are limited in nature under Planning Directive 6, is our experience.
Yep. And is the situation getting any better or worse for residents in Hobart looking for accommodation?
I just think you have to look at the occupancy rates or vacancy rates out there, and they've drifted below 1 and above 1%, but it is fairly dire.
At 0.7 at the moment, I think, something like that.
It is dire. Anything, as they say, under 2.5%, I think is, less than desirable.
And how many tent camps do we have around Hobart at the moment?
Look, I'm not aware of the specific number. Clearly, I'm aware of the Hobart Rivulet one, but and maybe the Southern Outlet one, but I can't give you an exact figure.
Yep. Well, I really struggle to approve more loss of housing in Hobart, but where our hands are tied, I'm not going to move for approval. I won't do that. And what's happened in the past when we have refused them is they've come back to us with no ability to defend it in the tribunal.
I move. Sorry.
Go on. I'm happy for you to.
Yeah. I move that this application be refused under clause E661. P1. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got a motion for refuse. Is there any other comments or questions on that?
Yeah. Thank you. Look, the short stay situation in Hobart is completely unacceptable. It's outrageous, and I thank the Deputy Lord Mayor for her impassioned plea this evening. I can't support Councillor Dutter's motion because we are unfortunately tied as the planning committee to take off our community representation hat as a councillor and act as a planning authority. And that's just a role that I take very seriously, my statutory obligations, and my understanding is that we have no legs to stand on for refusal of whole home short stays. That to me is undesirable and unsatisfactory, that we don't have discretion to make that decision for the benefit of our community in the broadest context. We're fully aware, as has been discussed tonight and at length at other meetings, that there is a housing crisis, and I note the irony of it being on Youth Homelessness Day today, and recognise all of the people that are struggling for housing around this city, and have spoken at length with some of the people living in the Rivulet camp about this matter. So I look forward to Council coming together over the next couple of months to work out a way forward that is outside of the planning scheme, and I think we have a tool available to us and a lever that we can pull, which is not in this committee. However, tonight we are still bound by the tools which we are given and the rules which we are bound to work under, and as a result I can't support Councillor Dutter's recommendation for refusal, and I will have to, unfortunately, with my hands tied behind my back and blindfolded, I will have to vote for approval of this item.
So would you be foreshadowing the officer's recommendation?
Foreshadow the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Any other comment? Councillor Ledberger.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to back up the words of a couple of my colleagues today. I work with people in crisis in my other job, including people who are homeless, and it is just so terribly upsetting that the council, this council and others, are unable to properly assess these applications. I'm also very disappointed to see in some of the documentation a reiteration of the state government's claim, a dishonest claim in my opinion, that the loss of thousands of residential properties around the state to short stay accommodation is not contributing to the spiralling housing crisis in the state. It is clearly a ridiculous statement from a government that has tied the hands of us and other planning authorities, and it just seems happy to sit back and fiddle while our housing market burns. I do believe the Planning Minister can address this problem with a stroke of the pen, but refuses to do so. And the result is this: that people all around Hobart continuing to find themselves homeless through no fault of their own. I particularly want to refer to my colleague, Councillor Postel's comments. We are bound currently in this planning committee to follow the rules as they are set. And unfortunately, I see no other option but to actually vote for this recommendation along the lines of the officer's recommendations, because I feel that it will simply just be appealed and we will spend an awful lot of money in the tribunal losing yet again. if indeed we can even get to the tribunal, because we can't find a planner to support our refusals. So I will be voting very reluctantly for this, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Loberg. Any other comment? Councillor Sherlock.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Look, I've heard the comments that have been made, and I fully understand what Councillor Loberger and Councillor Poxelt are saying. And of course, I am making comments right now in my capacity as planning authority. I think one of the important things that we must remember is this, that when an application doesn't meet the acceptable solutions, we go to the performance criteria, and of course then we have the option to exercise our discretion. And I think it's really important that we understand that we can exercise our discretion. So we have to find one. How can we exercise our discretion? And I think if we look at page 153, 7.3, the report actually says to us, so how do we exercise our discretion as a planning authority? So if we feel that we can actually refuse this on a planning point, how do we do that? Well, it's right there for me, and I'll read it. The sole discretion relates to the provision of one on-site car parking space which is required under the table E6.1 of the scheme. Currently, there is no on-site parking, and none is proposed. That, to me, is our ability to exercise our discretion to be able to refuse this, and I'll be doing as such. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Donnell.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your comments, Councillor Sherlock. Now, I, with the others, acknowledge that I am putting my planning authority hat, and not the community hat, and we take that oath and we make that statement, and I make it categorically that this is what I am doing here. Therefore, I have to now look at the criteria that's in front of us to say, does it fit, does it satisfy or not? Here is my reason using the criteria we're using, E661P. As I asked the question, page 152, you will read in there, it says, observations indicate that there is a large pool of parking that would be available to meet the potential demands of visitor and overflow parking, particularly after normal working hours. Observations indicate. Now, you and I, as councillors, are to make a decision. If we are to make the decision, we need empirical facts. We need evidence. Do you have that evidence? You don't. I've asked for that evidence. Once that evidence is submitted, then that will put me in a different light. At present, we don't. Here is the claim that is made. Alternatively, I can present to you anecdotal evidence where I live, where these homes are turning into mini hotels and the streets are jam-packed. I have done my own observations, but I'm not using that as empirical evidence, but anecdotal evidence. Here is a basis for you and I to use our discretion, because you don't have that evidence and you have to make the decision. Final point I want to make is this. As you have said, our hands are tied. I totally agree. I accept that point of view and that particular argument. Hence, the point I want to make here is this, that this particular directive planning number 6, which is in front of us, that is, we are under obligation to look at it. What I would want to say is this, that this directive is not fit for purpose. Simple as that. And I'm basing my objection on the grounds of parking, E6616, unless you can convince me otherwise. Thank you.
Any other comment? Councillor Bloomfield, Alderman Bloomfield, sorry.
Can I ask a question, please? Based on the argument, I have no doubt that most of us would be willing to support such an argument, but is it an argument that would hold up should it go to tribunal? Would that be a fair call? Are we at a high risk, medium risk, low risk of a success in the tribunal or appeal?
Yeah, look, I think there is very little to no ability to defend a refusal on the basis of car parking. The current use has a deficiency of 2 car parking spaces already. What's currently before council has a deficiency of 1. To make the argument that the proposed use would create a greater impact in terms of car parking is not sustainable, in my view.
Yeah, look, I'll say a bit. Look, I think it was in 2019 this council unanimously voted to declare a housing crisis. Everyone around this table, and including elected members that aren't present, I think all agrees that we do have a serious issue of housing affordability and access to housing by many people in the state, not just in Hobart. And as was said by one of the deputations, it's largely a factor of demand exceeding supply, and short stay obviously plays a role in that, but it is broadly a matter of demand exceeding supply. This is a conversation that's popped up numerous times in development applications, and it does get repeatedly reiterated that whilst we do have significant housing problems, unless those considerations are included in the provisions of the planning scheme, we can't use that to determine whether or not an application is compliant or non-compliant. That's been to my frustration in the past on other items, and the same applies here, and to the frustration of many around this table. But the reality is we do have initiatives underway to try and see change in regards to planning directive says. It might be a question for the questions without notice period as to how that's going. But in the meantime, we are bound here to assess these development applications according to the rules of the day. In regards to, and there was a quote taken out of the page 153 of the report, and I will read the entire quote, the entire paragraph, because I think it is relevant. The sole discretion relates to the provision of 1 on-site car parking space, which is required under table E6.1 of the scheme. Currently, there are no on-site parking and none is proposed. But it does then go on to say the proposal is considered against the performance criteria E6.6.1P1 of the Parking and Access Code and is considered to perform well. Just a question to the director. In regards to these applications for short stay permits that have come to council with the officer recommendation of approval and have subsequently been rejected by council, those that have gone to appeal, how many of those?
None of those have been upheld.
So we do need to, and I appreciate what Councillor Basalt said, because I know that this is an issue that he cares passionately about, but we do have a difference in our role as elected politicians and representatives of the community, and we do have very specific duties and responsibilities when we're conducting our role as a statutory planning authority, which is what we're doing tonight. As elected representatives, we can advocate change, we can put forward proposals to amend the planning scheme, but until such amendments are included or such changes enacted, we are bound here to enact the rules of the day. And this would just be another case of us rejecting something, it coming back to us with the same advice that we've gotten so many times. And we do need to separate those two factors. I definitely understand the frustrations. I do share the frustrations, especially around council trying to consider the issue of supply and demand in the housing market in our role as a planning authority. But ultimately we are limited to administering the rules of the day. It's not about whether or not we like it or don't like it, it's about whether or not it's compliant. And because otherwise, if we're voting on applications based on whether or not we like it or we feel happy voting for it, then it doesn't bear well for the future of planning or the quality of planning decisions and the consistency of rules being applied over the long term. So look, I'll not be supporting the motion by Councillor Dutta. I'll be supporting the foreshadowed by Councillor Basalt. Was there any other comment or questions? Or I know Councillor Dutter's got his hand up, but I think Councillor Kelly's. Did you have your hand up, Councillor? Yeah.
Through you, Chair, probably directed to you. Can you just refresh me why this is even coming to the meeting? Yes.
Director?
If this clearly doesn't, for all these other reasons, it's just absolute no-goer. What's the trigger there? Just to,
5 objections to the proposal. 5 or more.
I'm just struggling though to see why a proposal gets the oxygen if it's a clear, it clearly doesn't comply. Whatever. I'm not saying I agree or disagree with that. I'm just trying to understand the mechanics of why these are continually coming, even in my short stay here now. And no doubt that we're going to spend hours with this same audio loop we're on at the moment. I'm just trying to think in the interest of council's efficiencies and our time and costs and energies. Is this just going to continue to happen for the next 3 years?
Where the officer delegation doesn't allow officers to determine the application, we're obliged to put the application before the planning committee, and in this instance the trigger is that it exceeds the number of objections that would allow officers to determine the matter.
I was just under the impression if it was a clear non-compliant or tick in the box exercise, it wouldn't get up. Thank you for that explanation.
Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. I want to come back to that clause that you referred to in full, page 153, and the clause that was read. And let me read it in full as well, and give the interpretation that I can give to this. The sole discretion relates to the provision of one on-site car parking, etc., etc. The performance criteria E661P1 of the Parking Access Code and is considered to perform well. The operative term here for me is that it is considered to perform well. If the officers in their view are saying it is considered to perform well, we as elected members, on the contrary, can have a different view based on the fact that the evidence are not given to us, the observations that were made. And therefore, I am saying, taking that into consideration, that it is my considered view that there isn't the evidence for me to say it will perform well. Hence, I don't feel comfortable. Please note that it is not a matter of subjective feeling either we like it or not. Each one of us have to base our decision on E661P1, and that's what I am doing. I'm basing it on that, the parking element that we are talking about, the observations were done, we don't have that evidence, and therefore the conclusion that it performs well, on the contrary, I'm saying, because we don't have that information, I am of the view, and I consider that it might not perform well. The other point I want to make is this. This is a discretion we're using. Remember, it is a discretion. And on the basis of the information that we have, I use my discretion to say I will not support this. It will go to appeal. Remember, and we've been sitting on this for quite some time and we know the process, it'll go through mediation. It doesn't go to appeal. And hence the question asked to the director, how many have appealed? None. Because it doesn't go to appeal. And if we are able to compromise and come to a better term in mediation, we will have to then refuse our rejection and approve it. And that's what happens. It's my understanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Just in the interest of getting the language around appeals right, applications have been appealed. They might not proceed to a full merit-based hearing and they might go to mediation, but that's still part of the broad appeal process. Is that correct?
That's right. An appeal has been lodged under those previous instances, and there is a process to explore scope for mediation, and in all of those cases Council has mediated to the point where it's overturned its opposition and supported the application.
Thank you. Councillor Sherlock.
Yeah, sorry, so just to clarify, when we're talking about when something is refused, number one, there's a process. So we're talking about first it goes to mediation. Is there any money spent there when we're talking about, when we're considering money, if it goes to the next process, which is going to TASCAT and appeal on merits review, for example?
Well, look, there's officer time.
Officer time.
Yeah, officer time.
Is that completely in contrast to if we go to TASCAT and have it assessed on merits review?
Oh, yeah. Look, well, in this instance, I'm very confident that we wouldn't get to that point because you wouldn't.
That's right, I'm talking about the monetary aspect. So when it was saying, yes, okay.
Yeah,
so
no.
they're two different separate processes, aren't they? So we have mediation, which is officer time, and then do we have then a different amount of money that's spent when something goes to TASCAT as part of merits review?
Yeah, I mean, there will, theoretically, if it got to a full merits-based appeal, we would then need to engage a consultant that was in a position to be able to, a qualified consultant to defend council's position around the car parking issue.
And we haven't gone to that merits review process
No.
on any case right now, is that correct?
No, because we haven't been able to find anyone.
Yep. And then so when we talk about as a planning authority exercising its discretion, what section of LUPA, how do we, as a planning authority? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So,
Section 57.
Yeah. And this is that particular issue that we're entitled to exercise our discretion.
You are, but you need to base it on
the planning.
On the planning.
Yeah.
Questions that you've got.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Councillor Basalt.
Thank you. Just to make one point, and maybe it's best done through the director. Although it's very difficult to produce a figure when it comes to the cost of officer time, am I correct in my assumption that officer time still has a cost assigned to it?
Most definitely. Most definitely.
And I'll just make the point before we, unless anybody else wants to jump in, but before we move to a vote. Many other applications come up and there's a likelihood that a certain outcome is going to happen in the appeals tribunal. I'm usually the first to come up here and say that we've got a responsibility to be responsible in the way that we spend ratepayer money in defending decisions that we might have a predictable outcome. Interestingly enough, this isn't one of those cases because, as was hinted at, the reason why these appeals haven't actually gone to a full base merits hearing where we've incurred all the costs of having to hire consultants is because there isn't a single planning lawyer in the state of Tasmania that believes there's enough merit in those cases to take on the job. Which I think speaks volumes on its own, that for better or worse, and as frustrating as it is, as the rules of the day stand, the law is pretty settled in as far as the way that it's administered, the way that those criteria are administered. But Councillor Bloomfield, Alderman Bloomfield, sorry.
I just wanted to rephrase very much what you've just said because this is I do in my other job. We take an interpretation, we take the law, as we have in this case. We found a case. But there's a second element that exists. It's what I call precedent. It's how one interprets the law. There is a set process, a set way it is done. And it is done over and over again such that it is as important to consider as it is the written law itself. So we might look at the legislation here and we say, right, we've got something here, but then we have to apply, which is one of the reasons why we have the director here today for planning, to help us with the understanding of the interpretation and the application of the law. And this is why we might find things, but we have to put it through that filter and understand whether legal precedent stops us from going any further. In this particular instance, it's happened so many times. There is no lawyer willing to stand up or planning person to stand up to defend it because the precedent is so strong because it has been repeated so many times. This is where we are at, and this is what is going on here.
Councillor Dutta, and then we'll go to a vote.
Just a question for clarification. So, statement was made by Councillor Bloomfield about a legal precedent. Do we have a legal precedent in place in this regard?
Look, none that have been fully tested at the Planning Appeal Tribunal.
Thank you. So we don't have a precedent as such.
Well, I think there's been sufficient exploration of wanting to take these matters to appeal that they've all come, that weighted numbers give you some indication of the law.
Yeah, the question for me is there is no legal precedent as a case, that's what I'm saying, because that's the term that was used. Because in law, legal precedent refers to a case law.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you.
I'll put the motion for refusal by Councillor Dutta, noting that we've got the foreshadowed by Councillor Basalt, but I'll move the motion by Councillor Dutta. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. No. All those in favour for refusal, put your hands up. And against? Thank you. And then we have the foreshadowed by Councillor Basalt. I don't believe further debate's necessary. I think we've had it out. So I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. Show of hands. All those in favour say, raise your hand. Against. Okay, so that is approved. We'll move on to the next item, which is 6.1.1 McVilly Drive. We'll wait for the Deputy Lord Mayor to return to her seat. So we have McVilly Drive. Would anybody like to move and open the item? Councillor Basalt.
I'll move the officer recommendation.
Any discussion or questions?
Just very briefly, as Chair, as the Chair of the portfolio that contains mobility and movement, these slight realignments of paths actually make a big difference to the way they're utilised, and I applaud the Council officers for their work to ensure that linkages of new bridges and cycle infrastructure are to the optimum standard, and I hope that this increases the uptake of alternative means of transport such as cycling, scooting and walking and running, and I would encourage all of my colleagues at the table tonight to vote for approval of the realignment.
To the optimum standard and to generally make it as practical as possible. I've got no issue with the realignment in any meaningful sense. I will just ask as far as the representation by Tasrail, is there any response to the placement of the zebra crossing might potentially cause an issue of queuing at the tracks?
Look, we don't believe so. I mean, this has been reviewed in terms of the location. It has been reviewed by traffic engineers, and this location is the safest one, taking all of those matters into consideration. We and the traffic engineers are comfortable with the alignment and don't believe that this will represent a risk in practice.
So just to confirm, the location relative to the rail line was part of that consideration, and they did deem it to be safe. It wasn't that it wasn't considered.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. I'm comfortable with that. Councillor Harvey and then Councillor Loberger.
Yeah, I'm just scrolling through, Chair. I haven't found it yet. The cost of this, is that aligned with the construction of the bridge, or is this additional funds the council has to come up with?
This is an additional funding. Yeah, the cost of this realignment was not covered fully in the bridge construction.
Yep. So it's budgeted for this year.
Yeah, look, there is there is still an issue with the northern port access proposition. So we want to have that resolved in some form before we were to proceed with implementing this. But the majority of the alignment will remain. It's we want some resolution to that northern port access issue.
And will this be constructed by council work crew?
I don't know necessarily whether it'll be council work crew or whether it'll be a contractor. But, yeah.
Councillor Lohberger and then the Deputy Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. Just through you, I just had a question for the Chair, for the Director, sorry, just regarding the rail lines and the safety issue that Tasrail raised. I assume the safety issue was that if the rail lines were active, it will be a bit of a problem having traffic queuing over them. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So just through you again, Chair, if the rail line was to be reactivated, would we be revisiting this issue?
Look, in terms of it functioning as a fully functional rail corridor, I'm not sure what requirements there might be in terms of boom gates and the like. All those things would need to be taken into consideration. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
It'll be looked at least.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Through you to the Director, how does this tie in with the Hugh and Keys development? Is there any, it seems to lead to a path, or that path is leading down there anyway, isn't it, of the road?
Yeah. Well, you would imagine that there will be greater foot traffic attributed to that land use. This is designed to rationalise and make it somewhat of a more direct and safer route and crossing point. But it's not just about Hugh and Keys, of course. It's about the intercity cycleway and the like, and also a safe movement under the bridge for vehicles as well. At those times when the southern area of the cenotaph is used for parking.
Thanks. And just to make comment, I believe this is a good move, and thanks the officers for the work and the proposal. Anything that makes a better connection to cycle paths and links our current disconnected cycle paths and walkways is to be commended.
Thank you. Is there any other comment? Look, I'll just add, just in light of what Councillor Lohberger has said, my only sort of concern about this whole application was the Tasrail comments, and as Councillor Lohberger put forward, if and when that corridor is activated and intensified, we would be appropriately reconsidering the safety issues there. So in the meantime, I think it's perfectly reasonable to have the zebra crossing there. So I'll move that as moved by Councillor Basalt. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. We now move on to the last application of the night, which is 6.2.217 Alexander Street. We've still got more. Oh, thank you.
I'll move it.
Councillor Sherlock.
I was just going to say I'll move the recommendation.
Any questions, comments? I'm going to say something, Councillor Basalt.
Two foreshadows in a row is not great, but I would foreshadow approval against the recommendation of officers. And I'll start the debate on that, if that's okay with you, Chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
You can speak against the Councillor Sherlock's motion, and
so the reason, so I've been out to this site, and I think a number of people around this table have been out to visit this site. And I know that the refusal is largely around or the recommendation for refusal is largely around amenity and heritage overlays and characters of suburb. This property is located on the top of a hill, set back some distance from the roadway, and is at present, in its current state, not visible at all from any foot traffic or the road, mostly due to vegetation, admittedly. There's a large hedge at the front, but also because of the property's existing location. Now, this property is I believe, of very little heritage value. It is a ramshackle, weatherboard, 30s, 40s, 50s building with a concrete swimming pool at the back that is not used, and it's had a multitude of extensions and is in very poor condition. And a great heritage officer said to me once that heritage is not about the past. Heritage is about the future and what we as a community want to bring forward with us that is historically significant to the future fabric of the community or of the area. And I think that's a really good interpretation of heritage and when it should and should not be applied. In this instance, I do not believe that the existing property has any heritage value, and I don't think it adds any heritage amenity or value to the area. I fundamentally disagree with the Heritage Officer's assessment. And that's why I believe that it should be approved. And I would note that this is going to 2 architecturally designed dwellings, which, although not part of the planning authority's assessment, it is an additional dwelling being added into the mix should this be approved.
Thank you, Councillor Basalt. Is there any other comment? Councillor Lobo.
For you, Chair, I just wanted to ask a question, the Director. There was comment in the paperwork somewhere, which I won't be able to find now, but it just noted that the number of bedrooms was the same. Leave the single residence there, or whether we have the 2 residences built. But I also note that it seems to me there was a lot of people in rooms that aren't actually bedrooms in the existing property. Exactly how many bedrooms are we talking about here for the existing property versus the 2 new properties?
The plans indicate that there are 6 bedrooms within the existing property, and that's what's proposed, 3 each for the proposed dwellings.
Okay, I'll just leave it at that for now. Thank you, Chair.
Any other comment or question? Councillor Basalt raised many of the points that I would have raised. The building itself is. I've visited the site as well, and I've walked up and walked around the building. Not in the greatest of condition, and as you can see, it's had add-ons and renovations, and it's hardly in the condition of as it was when it was built. It's only visible through gaps in the landscaping and garden, and it's so far off and so disconnected with the streetscape that, as Councillor Basalt says, I don't think that it contributes to the precinct or to the heritage nature of the street or area in any meaningful way. As Councillor Loberger indicated, there's one 6-bedroom house. They might be registered as bedrooms. My house is a 4-bedroom house and only 2 bedrooms are used as bedrooms. I think 2 3-bedroom houses would be more efficient, purely from the perspective of actually putting people in beds. What's being proposed would be more efficient insofar as actually providing housing for people, noting as per the previous item that's not a planning consideration. But in regards to what's important cultural heritage, I appreciate that the precinct itself has heritage value. It also does have a large variety of different types, different periods of construction, different designs. So to remove something that is not individually heritage listed has no individual significance other than that it is of a certain age and is not visible from the streetscape. To replace it with two architecturally designed houses that speak to the needs of today, I believe is a response that I believe that is an outcome that's in the interest of the area. I think it's in the interest of the community, and I think with that interpretation, I think it is compliant with the provisions of the scheme or the planning scheme that we have in front of us. So I'd be supporting Councillor Passalt's foreshadowed motion on this, but I'll allow further. I've got Councillor Kelly and then the Deputy Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. I also visited the site and spoke to the occupants and the owner of the property, and the owner has informed me that the only reason that's 6-bedroom in there is that the original lounge room was split in two, and he just doubts whether it's compliant as far as regulatory requirements go for occupation. I note too that there's no objections from any neighbours. The two objections were from the tenants who are living in there, and of course they quite within their rights to do that, and that's noted. I believe it's not an excellent example of heritage, and I just think in summary there's a greater positive from allowing this application to proceed forward in its current state. Thank you.
Deputy.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Have we got the heritage officer here?
Yeah,
So can we,
Ali Costin is
we
here.
perhaps hear from the heritage officer in relation to this, please?
Yep. Did you have a specific question or just in general?
Well, why you feel that it is unacceptable. Thank you.
Sure. And through you, Chair. So the property dates to the original subdivision of the Golf Links estate. It's a 1920s property. The Golf Links is a precinct that has a very good example of houses from the 1920s and 30s, the best such in Hobart. This property retains original details, original finishes and form and style that's reflected within the precinct statements of significance. It reflects the original subdivision pattern and pattern of development, which is single houses with garden settings, and that's why I believe my assessment is that this property contributes as a house within the whole heritage precinct.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Harvey.
Yep, just the heritage officer. So while it's not individually listed, it's the precinct that we're focused on here, the Golf Links precinct, which was a post-World War II settlement.
That's correct. So it's the 1920s to 30s interwar settlement. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Councillor Lieberger.
Thank you. A statement was made that it has very little or no heritage value at all. Would you respond to that, please? It doesn't have any heritage value. Is it true? Or why do you say it has?
Yeah, sure. Through you, Chair. So I believe it has heritage value to the precinct. It's obviously not individually listed, so it's not of a very high significance, but as a house within the precinct that reflects the construction date, it reflects the pattern of development, it is part of the original subdivision, it's an important building that tells the historical story of how that subdivision came to be. That is the reason why it is significant.
And just a follow-up question. So, if this house was not demolished, would that be looked at differently?
Yes, through you, Chair. That's correct. If perhaps the applicant was proposing an ancillary dwelling and keeping the house or proposing an extension, it would certainly be a different assessment that I'd make.
Thank you. And just a question to the Director. If this was to go to appeals, would we be able to defend it?
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, in terms of upholding the officer's recommendation, yes.
Yeah.
the other question would be who's going to appeal? Oh, Councillor Loberger.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if this is for the Heritage Officer or for the Director. I too visited the site, and I had to wait around there for a while, so I had a bit of a look, and I've also door knocked that entire street. Several doors down, I think it's 3 doors down the street, down the hill, there's a very large extension being built on a property that is quite large and bulky and boxy, and I'm just wondering just how that, given the objections we've got to this particular proposal, how is it that 3 doors down the road, something that is of a very similar size and bulk to what we're talking about here, is currently being constructed?
Yeah, I don't know. Ali, did you want to comment in relation to that?
Through you, Chair. So that proposal is, I guess, different in terms of what it had to be assessed against. There was no demolition proposed of the original house. The original house is still there. It is a large extension, but they have kept the original 1920s house.
Councillor Basalt and Councillor Sherlock.
So, just for our Heritage Officer, the principle is that this is a property that is representative of a time where resources were poor, the 20s and 30s, and it was a standard, if you will, subdivision of its time, with houses set back from the street as a kind of standard way of designing subdivision. So in this instance, if the original home was kept and the building was built in front of that building, would that not have an equally significant impact on the heritage assessment, in that it would be the main criteria of this being assessed as heritage important is that it is set back from the road and it has a large garden in the front of it? So would that have a significant impact if it was leaving the existing building but building a building in front of it?
Through you, Chair. It's tricky to say without kind of seeing actual building plans. It would still certainly have performance criteria that it would need to be assessed against, and that would be whether a proposed building in front of the existing building results in detriment to the overall precinct. I haven't seen anything that demonstrates this, so I would be a bit uncomfortable saying yes or no. But I would be comfortable to see some drawings and documentation. It's certainly an option. It may be possible to perhaps put some kind of an ancillary dwelling to the front side, and that could perhaps meet some of the performance criteria.
And a follow-up question for your Chair. So the context of these subdivisions that have historically had a house set well back into the block that has heritage overlays, it sounds like there's a general principle of recognising that as a heritage quality for an entire suburb overlay. Is that a reasonable assessment as something that you're considering when you're undertaking your heritage assessment?
Through you, Chair. I wouldn't say that all the houses in this particular precinct are set back from the street. Alexander Street, particularly on this side of Alexander Street, that is the development pattern. I would say that the Golf Links estate as a whole definitely demonstrates a house and garden type subdivision, which was very popular in that period.
Thank you.
Councillor Sherlock.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Just a couple of questions, I suppose. Oh no, my computer's just done something silly. Please bear with me. Oh, here it is. Okay. So when we're talking about when we're acting as planning authority and when we're exercising our discretion, it's done when performance criteria is invoked. Is that correct? So on this particular occasion, has it been on the performance criteria, or does the application actually not meet any of the acceptable solutions either?
Well, there are a number of acceptable solutions that aren't met, and they are outlined in, if I can... 6.5. Relating to sunshade, layout of parking spaces, and building and works within the heritage precinct. And the building works and also demolition relating to that heritage precinct, so within the heritage precinct. So there are a number of acceptable solutions that aren't met, as outlined. They do meet the performance so far as the officers are concerned in relation to parking and sunshade. The officers are of the view that they don't meet the performance criteria so far as the Historic Heritage Code is concerned.
So elected members acting as a planning authority can then exercise their discretion on that last point that you've just made, correct?
That's correct if they assume that it meets the performance criteria.
Right. So when we sorry, Councillor.
No, I'm not objecting to you.
I'm
trying to go next.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So when we talk about this in relation, say we were talking before about a certain argument when we go to appeal, do we have legal precedents at all for when you refuse something, when the council officers have refused something, has it gone to appeal and it's been upheld that we actually go according to the recommendation of the officers? We'd have precedents of that, wouldn't we?
Many times. I would back my officers every time.
Yeah,
but we don't get necessary support by the appeal tribunal in all instances.
Okay, great. I just wanted to confirm that. So I think for me, it's really the case of the arguments that were made previously for the motion, so the motion before this, the application before this. When we're talking about rules and we're trying to uphold rules and we're trying to be the planning authority that is upholding rules, things like comments like, it's about our feeling or I don't think, it really becomes irrelevant. It becomes about what the recommendation is based on the rules that have been applied from the Hobart Interim Planning Scheme. And I think as we note from the officer's recommendation, it doesn't meet the acceptable solution or the performance criteria with respect to clause 13.8.1 P1 and then also 13.8.2 P1 as well. So for me, if we're going, okay, here, let's act as a planning authority. Does it meet these certain rules? Well, no, actually. Our qualified staff have said, no, it doesn't. So individuals are more than entitled to exercise their discretion. Absolutely, like you could for the thing just before we had. You can do that here as well. And in my opinion, on this particular occasion, I'll be supporting our officer recommendations. Well, I do understand and I do appreciate what the applicant and the difficulty that you might be facing in terms of the precinct. But what's more important to me in terms of it's not what's important to me. That's probably not the best use of words. What's more convincing for me is this: the loss of a building that contributes to the historical, cultural, heritage significance of the precinct, and it has not been demonstrated that there are environmental, social, economic or safety reasons of a greater value to the community than the historic, cultural, heritage values of the place, that there are no prudent or feasible alternatives, and that the replacement building is more complementary to the heritage values of the precinct. I think that point one is really, really important, and I'm sure everybody's read the other points that's been outlined there regarding 13.8.2.1, but I think that's very significant for me.
Thank you, Councillor Sherlock. We've got Councillor Harvey, and then I've put my name on the list as well.
Thanks, Chair. Just a comment on this type of development. It's a large block, it's 1,000 square metres, and this is one of those Google Earth developments, I think, where you have developers looking for land that's large enough to be subdivided in. And I think we've got to be aware of the impact of that in certain areas where you find a large block of land, regardless of what house is on that land, you want to get rid of that house, to clear it, and put in other unit developments. So this was not the right spot to have chosen, I don't think, by the developer. They probably should have looked somewhere else for 1,000 square metres of land to divide, because maybe they didn't anticipate the golf links would be held in such high value by the City of Hobart, by our heritage officers and by the planning scheme. So I'll be supporting the officer's recommendation for refusal, but I will ask the director if this pattern of development will be a thing into the future, as we see in all cities, where large blocks of land are bought up, or multiple blocks neighbouring each other bought up, which then we see multiple residential development applications coming through. Are we seeing a lot of that haven't come to council yet?
Not a great deal. And the reason for that is, the heritage provisions of the scheme that tries to protect these areas. As you know, across the road in Alexandra Street, that precinct, that area is not covered by a heritage precinct,
which we're working to.
Which there has been many concerns raised with multiple developments in that location, and we've had considerable concerns raised to us to the point where we are seeking to incorporate that within the golf links because of the outcomes that we're discussing today.
So this speculator style of housing, I think we've got to be conscious of, and I'm glad you've reinforced that our heritage overlays protect areas from this sort of excessive development of larger blocks, where it doesn't matter what the standard of the house is, whether it's a good, bad or indifferent, the objective is to demolish it and put in more units which are worth a fortune. And we've seen examples where houses have been demolished illegally in Hobart in order to put in 4 units, and they're happy to pay the fine because the fine was irrelevant compared to the value of 4 townhouses. So I'm conscious of this type of development. It's not the missing middle kind of development that we're looking for in Hobart. It's a speculation type of development, and it could, if we're not careful, have a big impact on our heritage precincts. So therefore, I'm strongly in supportive of the officer's recommendation for refusal.
I'll put you. I'll speak, and then we'll hear from you, Alderman Bloomfield. First of all, a question to the heritage officer. Isn't it true in that entire area of golf links there is many houses as is described in the heritage statement, but there's also quite a variety of houses, not just in their positioning on the block, but also in the period at which they're built and the layout of the house itself. There's quite a eclectic sort of variety of homes from different regions, different time periods. Is that not correct?
Through you, Chair. It's actually quite a unique heritage precinct. All the houses were built generally within a 10-year time frame, so they all have very cohesive, collective kinds of detailing. They're almost all either Californian bungalow styles or Edwardian style. There are some precincts in Hobart that do have a very eclectic mix, but the Golf Links Estate is known as a very fine group of purely 1920s and 30s houses.
Yeah, okay, right, because it doesn't really line up when I've gone around the area and you sort of see the red brick buildings that come right up to the street frontages, and you see sort of houses from entire different periods all in the area. So I thought
Look, there are exceptions,
yeah.
But the vast majority are consistent with Ali's description of the precinct, which is a rarity.
Right. Okay, look, just going back to, we'll start with Councillor Harvey's comments. The indication that this is a speculator type thing. It's going to run roughshod over areas. It's been pretty well, I think, agreed upon and pretty well said in this council numerous times that we do need to do better at encouraging better use of our current land for housing. We need to increase density in areas that have inefficient blocks. I would suggest, given especially the state of this house, the state of the property, it's terribly inefficient in the way that it uses the land. And as was said by a couple of people, including Councillor Basalt, from the streetscape, it doesn't speak to the heritage nature of the street. It doesn't contribute anything because it's not visible. For it to be removed, it would detract nothing because nothing is seen currently. And for the outcome to be, and let's go back to the performance criteria, the relevant performance criteria that we're debating, E13.8.1. Demolition must not result in the loss of any of the following: buildings or works that contribute to historic cultural heritage significance of the precinct. As has been said, this is not a building that contributes positively to the story of Goslin's estate, and it's not visible from the streetscape. People drive past, people walk past, unless they're actively walking up the driveway to specifically look at that property, they can't see it. It contributes nothing to the precinct of the area because it's not seen. Fabric or landscape elements, including plants, trees, fences, paths, outbuildings and other items that contribute to the historical, cultural, heritage significance of the precinct. Same applies. And then even if we say, okay, unless, the first criteria there is that there are environmental, social, economic or safety reasons of greater value to the community. We've just had in the previous item the conversation that we have planning rules that exist under the rules of the day, but due to the housing considerations that we are currently dealing with as a city, these planning criteria are completely not fit for purpose, I believe was the words that we used, and it's a tragedy that we have to apply the rules of the day. And it's a tragedy that there isn't any consideration in the planning scheme for the issue of housing supply and demand. There are environmental, social, economic or safety reasons of greater value to the community. We have a building here that visually contributes nothing to the area, in terrible state of repair, officially has 6 bedrooms, but as has been mentioned, I'd be very, very sceptical that there's 6 beds in those bedrooms and at least 6 people living in that house. And it's being proposed to be replaced with 2 architecturally designed 3-bedroom houses that, by the nature of the configuration, would be more likely to have those bedrooms be used as permitted as designed, which would by that virtue add increasing beds to the supply. So when we're talking about social, economic or safety reasons of greater value to the community, we're comparing increasing the number of beds that are available to people looking to rent or looking to buy, compared with a house that arguably contributes very little, if anything, to the cultural significance of the area. The point I'd make, and I'm speaking directly to the performance criteria here. Even saying that, I don't think that the level of the contribution to cultural historic heritage in that area is of significance enough to even trigger Part A or B of that provision. So I would be strongly urging everybody here to support the foreshadow motion. The performance criteria permits it, and as has been said, we get advice from officers and we take that in and we assess it and we allow it to inform us in good faith, but we don't, and we shouldn't be just rubber stamping the advice that we get. We take it into consideration. And when we do exercise that discretion, we do have to do it under the best of consideration, not just because we like something or don't like something. But when we do have an application like this, I think we are well placed to use that discretion. So I'd be encouraging everybody to support the foreshadowed Alderman Bloomfield is next.
I actually lived in that street 3 doors down for a number of years, and that whole area was renowned for being university student share accommodation, and we would shove as many people into those houses as we could. And I lived in one where someone actually lived in the dirt floor underneath me. That was what was there. And it's interesting to learn that, what is it now, 20, 30 years later, we still have houses in that area still doing the same thing. But the question I actually have is more to do with looking at how we apply these rules. Is there a limit to how poor a condition a property may be for these types of rules to actually apply? I mean, if you have something that's, does it have to be completely derelict and unable to be able to sustain someone living in it for it to not apply, or does it still apply? Do we have to force people to actually upgrade these homes from whatever derelict position they are? Or is there a limit where we say, you know what, this has not been cared for a number of years, it no longer really meets much of any potential, it hasn't done for a long time. We've clearly got a place where they've just said, you know what, if there's a room that should have a person in it, they probably don't have a dining room, a living room or any other room, they're all bedrooms, and they're probably, like you've said, chop them into smaller sections to get more people in. I appreciate absolutely the reason that happens is because it is so expensive, and I get that. But the living conditions may not be particularly appropriate either. There's already been a suggestion that this may not even be appropriate as far as council regulations go. We don't know. We haven't explored that, have we? But I do question, how poorly does a house have to be for this to actually still be upheld with these types of rules?
Look, it needs to, if there's fundamental structural failure of the building, then we can certainly take that into account. However, we need to be very careful. If we allow property owners to use the basis of the dilapidation of the building, and I'm not suggesting for a minute that has done this in this instance, allow the building to degrade over time without undertaking necessary general maintenance, to use that as a basis to allow the building to be demolished would be a dangerous precedent, because you could then have your streetscapes continually eroded by property owners willfully not maintaining them, allowing them to be degraded, pointing at that as a basis for, well, this is in poor state, I need to demolish it. That would be a dangerous precedent.
But that's exactly what UTAS did, isn't it?
Look, I'd take your point, but let's keep it relevant to the application in front of us. Who's next? Councillor Basalt.
I'll just make a question to the Director first. Director, in light of Councillor Harvey's comments about speculation, what would be the maximum number of individual residences that would be allowed on a 1,000 square metre block in a residential zone such as this?
That's a good question. I'm not. It would be in the order of 3 or 4, I think. It's in that order. I don't have the exact figures though. Yeah,
thank you. That would be my interpretation based on the Mount Stewart example that was used by Councillor Harvey. I don't actually believe this is property speculation as a reason for this. If you're a pure property developer, you would be putting as much in as you can get away with. This is only asking for 2 residences and no expansion, allegedly, of the bedrooms. I do note that a property behind Alexander Street, which is 34 View Street, directly behind back fence, appears to me, based on my novice and limited understanding of the way Hobart has been developed, that appears to be potentially the original home in this area. And one of the ironies of the conversation we're having is that, in fact, we're talking about the heritage value of a subdivision in the context of trying to subdivide, right? So if we ran that argument back to 1920, this house wouldn't have existed. And it's a reasonable consideration to make. Yes, there is heritage value to all of our precincts, West Hobart, North Hobart. We made a decision at the last planning meeting about a very significant property in Sandy Bay not to allow them to extend into their backyard because of the significant value of that specific property. Now, the Heritage Officer has said tonight that this property in and of itself is not separately listed, it's not individual listing, and it's got significance because of the place in which it sits and by which its surrounding buildings accompany it. But on its own, as a standalone property, it doesn't actually have its own heritage value. And it is, in fact, its own subdivision. And so the irony is not lost on me that should be voted down based on, or refusal based on, the fact that a subdivision would change the amenity of the street, that was the exact decision that was taken, or the converse decision that was taken in the 20s to allow the entire subdivision to be built in the first place.
Deputy Lord Mayor and then Councillor Dutta.
Question, Lord, through you to the Director. If this is refused tonight, is it possible that another application is lodged for this same property?
It is, Chair.
Councillor Dutta.
Thank you. Chair, I am quite satisfied with the arguments presented by the officers in here. Now, the alternative objections that's been argued does not convince me, nor have they related to the clauses as in front of us. Now, for me, there are a number of factors. Point number one is that it is not about a subdivision. For me, it is basic E13.8P1 1P1 for me is based on the fact of demolition. And because the house is going to be demolished, hence we are looking at it from a heritage point of view. It's not about the subdivision. That's point number one. Point number two, statement was made that there is very little or no heritage value. But our staff who are qualified have presented to us and said no, and we have listened to the written document and the verbal presentation that it has quite a significant heritage value. Point number three is this. The previous one that we were debating, remember, it was only based on performance criteria, E661P1. And there we had the discretion. If you look at this one here, it is very clear to me that it is refusal on the basis of acceptable solution, and in my view, which is more objective. And not only that, we also have performance criteria that it does not meet. So, looking at this, it is very convincing for me that the officers' recommendations I'm quite satisfied with. And the final point that I want to make here is this, that when you look at this, E13.8.1P1, now that there are heritage significance of the precedent, and it has been demonstrated that there are no environmental, social, economic, or safety reasons given to us to convince me otherwise. So if you look at it in that context, not in the context of subdivision, but in the context of being a heritage value because of its historical reasons, I'm not convinced with the arguments presented that we should oppose this. Thank you.
Councillor, did you say that it was one of the reasons for refusal was based off its failure to comply with acceptable solutions?
Say it again.
I wanted to clarify something that you said a moment ago. Did you say one of the reasons for refusal was because of a failure to meet acceptable solutions?
Yeah, that was my understanding earlier when the explanation was given to the question asked by Councillor Sherlock. So the handset reference.
No, I think the question was, were there elements of this proposal that didn't comply with the acceptable solutions? And I outlined 3. That's not to say that they don't comply with the performance criteria. And it's only on the basis of non-compliance with the performance criteria can you refuse an application.
Thank you. Yeah, all right. And that's the point I was trying to make to clarify. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Thank you.
Look, I think we risk going around in circles. I think everyone knows what our what views around the table are. So I'll put the motion for refusal moved by Councillor Sherlock, noting that there's a foreshadowed by Councillor Basalt. So all those in favour of the refusal say aye. Against, no. No. Show of hands, all those in favour? And against? Okay, and the foreshadowed, I don't believe there's further debate necessary, but the approved.
Can I add?
Oh, please, Councillor Basalt.
Thank you. I would like to ask the Director, can we condition the recommendation against officer's advice to include retention of the vegetation at the front of the property?
We can. We can include that as a recommendation. Where possible.
Where possible and feasible, but the intention of retaining the veg at the front, which does add to the structure.
Okay, so that's now the active motion, as moved by Councillor Basalt. I see Councillor Harvey with his hand up.
I've got a question. Were you invited to visit the property?
I'm not sure it's relevant.
No, it is. Well, I haven't seen the property. I'm wondering whether we all got invites to go or whether only selected councillors got invites to go to the property. So there was no formal invite to visit the property? No one's prepared to say? Okay.
I just drove along and had a look, and I spoke to the owner. It's quite with my legal rights to do that, I believe. I could have caught a bus down too, but I went in and I asked the owner if I had his permission to go on the property. He said, yes, you have my permission to go on it. I went on the property. I knocked on the door to advise the occupant I was there with the permission of the landlord. He said, that's fine. He'd like to have a discussion with me. I had a good and long and frank conversation with the tenant, one of the tenants, and the same with the thing. And I just thought that was a good thing to do in my role as a thing. And it's all above board and legal and part of my due diligence. Did you go down and have a look, Bill? Did you go and have a look at it?
I've been past that property many times. I didn't go inside the property, no. But I'm just curious.
Let's order. Excuse me, can we keep the debate through the chair, please?
Yeah, through the chair. I'm just curious to see who got a formal invite.
Right. Note your curiosity. Any other comment or question? Or I think the debate's run its course. So the motion is for approval with the added condition. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. Show of hands. All those in favour. And against. That one's approved. We'll move on to reports now. Excuse me, let me get to the right spot. 7.1, Planning Advertised Application Report. Deputy, thank you. Ms. Aby, are there any interesting items of note?
There's a mix of residential and commercial applications on the list tonight. There's one tonight at number 5 on the list, 179 Macquarie Street, which is the hotel being constructed at the moment. The application itself is just for signs to reflect that it will be a Novotel hotel. I'll also mention item number 7, which is a visitor accommodation application, which has been to the council previously and was approved for a limited 2 years so that one's currently being advertised.
Excellent. Any questions on any of the items on there, or we're happy to put that? I'll put that as moved by the Deputy Lord Mayor. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried. Next one, 7.2, Delegated Decision Report. Thank you, Councillor Sherlock. Any comment or questions on that report? No. Very good. We now move to responses to questions without notice. Would you like to move them? Does somebody needs to move it? Oh, we don't do it, okay. Oh, apologies. I'll put the motion as moved by Councillor Sherlock. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Thank you. Apologies for that. Number 8, responses to questions without notice. Thank you, Deputy. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried. We then move to questions without notice. Are there any questions without notice? Very good. Right, before we close the open portion of the meeting, thanks to the students from the planning course for observing. I might just ask, because there isn't much in the close. Can somebody guide them into the lounge? Because we have invited them to hang and chill with us after the meeting, so we shouldn't be too long. It should only be a very short closed meeting. But thanks for being here.
There's nothing on this agenda, is there?
Can we get a motion to close the open and open the closed from Councillor Sherlock? Thank you. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. Carried.